We try to eat healthy.
You've more than tried. You succeeded. Wow. You're putting all of our appetites. Should we be studying Torah? Or is this a class on culinary delights?
Well, now I'm going to go. I'm going to mute myself.
Okay.
Just when we were all eager for the recipe.
Well, we have a nice crowd here, so we will welcome everybody to it's the fourth session, but unfortunately only the third, since we had to cancel the first one. And tonight we have a duo, Rabbi Douglas Kohn and Rabbi Jacob Rosner. Our Newburgh rabbis will be talking together about Shifra and Puah. So without further ado, I don't know which of you is starting, but we're recording, so take it away.
Good evening, everybody. And how wonderful. Thank you to Sharon and our Federation for putting this together, and to all of our colleagues from Maclay Kodesh, which represents most of the Reform and Conservative clergy colleagues of our county. And we wanted to be sure that we had the chance to study together in this period of time of the Omer, as we move from Pesach to Shavuot, and moving from oppression to freedom, and moving from Egypt to a land of promise, and growing in our studies as well. And commonly we would study the Pirkei Avot at this time, the wonderful ethical texts of the Mishnah. However, when we gathered together, we said, why don't we move to another very interesting subject, and that is some women who we may not have studied sufficiently in our biblical texts. And so tonight we want to share with you two heroic midwives, Shifra and Puah. I'm going to put on in this moment the text from Exodus, and then I'll be sharing some midrashim, and then Rabbi Rosner, who shares our campus with us at Temple Beth Jacob and Congregation of Goodness Israel, will then afterwards he'll also, I believe, be sharing from the midrash. So we're going to start with the text and then move into subsequent texts. So I'm going to put this up on the screen now for us, and as I put it on the screen, I'm going to invite us to share a blessing for Torah study. And although we're muted, we can all say it in our own venues. Ends with the words La Sok B'divrei Torah, to engage in the study of Torah. Baruch Atah Adonai Eloheinu Melech HaOlam Asher Kidshanu B'mitzvotav V'tzivanu La Sok B'divrei Torah. Blessed and praised are you, Lord, our God, who rules the world, who makes us holy with commandments and commands us to engage in the study of Torah. So here we are in the very beginning of Exodus, and we get the names of all of the males in Joseph's family that came from Jacob. But then around verse 15, we get this paragraph here, which I thought I'd read aloud to introduce to us these two heroic women before we turn to figuring out what we can learn from them. The king of Egypt, also known as Pharaoh, spoke to the Hebrew midwives, one of whom was named Shifra, and the other Puah, saying, when you deliver the Hebrew women, look at the birth stool. If it is a boy, kill him. If it is a girl, let her live. And I've underlined this next verse. The midwives, fearing God, did not do as the king of Egypt had told them. They let the boys live. So the king of Egypt summoned the midwives, and our text will continue. The text should continue, and said to them, why have you done this thing, letting the boys live? The midwives said to Pharaoh, because the Hebrew women are not like the Egyptian women. They are vigorous. Before the midwife can come to them, they have given birth. And God dealt well with the midwives, and the people multiplied and increased greatly. And because the midwives feared God, he established households for them. Then Pharaoh charged all his people, saying, every boy that is born you shall throw into the Nile, but let every girl live. And so what I want to do, I want to highlight for us. Oops, that was messy. The midwives feared God. Now, before we go anywhere else and look at the midrash, the commentary, let me ask, and you can unmute yourselves here for this. Do the midwives fear Pharaoh? Anybody want to jump into that? The midwives had Pharaoh.
No, they didn't fear Pharaoh.
They didn't fear Pharaoh. Let's try to say that 4 times fast. They didn't fear Pharaoh. It doesn't say that they feared Pharaoh, but wouldn't you think that perhaps that would be the intelligent thing to do, is to fear Pharaoh? He was the king of Egypt.
It might be the intelligent thing, but they obviously didn't fear Pharaoh because they let the boys live.
It says they feared God and they did not do as the king of Egypt had told them. So what I want to raise with us is this discussion between fear and courage.
Yeah, but they were together. They weren't acting as like one person. They were acting as a group.
So perhaps.
But also, I think that they did fear Pharaoh, but I think it was brave of them. It was the courage. Their courage was to fear God more and to follow God's commandments rather than the commandments of a human.
Perhaps it was easier to defy Pharaoh than clearly to defy God, but they wouldn't defy God because they feared God. Yirat Hashem. They had a fear, some say an awe of God, but it doesn't indicate there was any fear of Pharaoh, who was the tyrant, but rather there was, twice we see in this text, twice we see there, and then here, that they feared God, but this may be the fear called Yirah, which is Yud Resh Aleph, which is an awe-some fear, not a terrible fear. So what I wanted is I wanted you to keep all this in mind while we take a look at Midrash Rabbah, the great Midrash, the large Midrash, and see how it explicates this idea of the midwives feared God, because that phrase appears twice in this paragraph. And you've all added some really great thoughts. Let's go down, if my finger will allow us to the Midrash. And here it is on this side. This is the first time the Midrash here tries to address this. I'll read it for you again so I don't have to unmute and have us speaking over each other. And because the midwives feared God, concerning them it is said, and this comes from Eshet Chayil, from Proverbs 31, the second to last verse of the chapter of the entire book of Proverbs, that a devout husband will say to his wonderful wife each Shabbos, a woman that feareth the Lord with Yirat Hashem, Yirat Elohim, she shall be praised. And then it says, and did not as the king of Egypt commanded them. So it seems like the Midrash is saying that they either feared God and went to what God said, or they did not do as the king of Egypt said. There was a dichotomy. There was an either or, a zero-sum game here. The midwives could not do both. They couldn't fear God and observe the king's command. And how did they know what to do? Well, they were praiseworthy for fearing the Lord, for revering the Lord. So again, they had a zero-sum game. The teeter-totter goes one way or the other way. It cannot go both ways. They can only pick one. If they pick A, they have to reject B. If they pick B, they reject A. It's called a chiasmus, or again, a zero-sum game here. So what was it? Was it fear or was it courage? What do you think?
Well, they feared God so that they would be praised. It doesn't say anything about that for not obeying the king of Egypt.
Good. And the question here is, did it take any courage to achieve what they did?
Absolutely.
think
They
that-
were standing up
yes.
against the king, who was, I mean, Pharaoh was, in fact, in Egypt, he was a god. So they were
Correct.
standing up against the God of Egypt, who could
To fear
kill
the God
them,
of Israel.
torture them and kill them.
And these were, don't forget, these are midwives who were also enslaved. They were subject to the laws of Pharaoh. Someone else was speaking, I think, also. Someone else want to jump in?
My feeling also is that they showed courage to defy Pharaoh in order so that they could trust God to do that they were doing the right thing as far as God was concerned.
Notice that Pharaoh did not give them any consequences. The consequences that Pharaoh threatened with the midwives, if Pharaoh did, are not indicated. So
Michelle, you had your hand up.
I don't think
Michelle?
it was courage or fear. I thought it was a belief. I see it as a belief in God and their faith.
okay, it could be, although the text does say Yirah, Yirat Hashem, Yirat Elohim, that there was a fear, but this fear could be an awe. I see that Jill is raising her hand. Please unmute yourself and jump in before we go somewhere else.
I think I think the fact that they had an excuse for the Pharaoh showed that they were afraid of him. Otherwise, they wouldn't be so prepared with an excuse. I think they were terrified of Pharaoh, and that's why they thought of this amazing thing that came to their heads.
Interesting idea. And what buttressed them, if they had this fear of Pharaoh, was that their Yirat Hashem, their fear or awe of God, was stronger. Let's keep that in mind as we go and look at the end of this midrash, which I hopefully will read. Let's bring the end of it. Let me read this for us, and then we'll jump back in and we'll finish up, and then I'm going to turn the baton over to the Rabbi Rosner, who may take us in a completely different direction. But another explanation, another explanation of the midwives feared God. They modeled their conduct on that of their progenitor, Abraham, of whom God testified, Ki ata yadati, and now I know that you are a God-fearing man. This comes from the Akedah, the binding of Isaac, when Abraham brought Isaac to the mountain, to Mount Moriah, and was willing to offer him as testimony of his fear of God. And the same phrase, Yirat Hashem, is there. And so now the midwives said, here it says, when it says the midwives, this is putting it into their voices. They said, Abraham, our ancestor, peace be upon him, Shalom Aleich, opened an inn where he fed all wayfarers, men who were uncircumcised. And as for us, not only have we not wherewith to feed them, but we are even to slay them. So we were supposed to we can't feed anybody else. We're supposed to slay these strangers. And then they say, no, we will keep them alive. So they defied not only Pharaoh's decree about the babies, but this whole ethic of antipathy, antagonism, and vilification of the other. When Pharaoh saw that, they did not fulfill his decree. He sent for them, and hence the king of Egypt called for the midwives. And when he called for the midwives, they still nevertheless decided that their relationship was that one. So as we kind of wind up here for a moment before we come back to it after Rabbi Rosner teaches, I want us to recognize that there is this fear, courage continuum. Fear will prevent us from acting out of courage, and courage will prevent us from acting out of fear. And that's the genius here, is when we think of people with courage, and I know that right now we've been watching what's been happening in North Carolina, we watched Minnesota, that there are people who are not fearing the threat of tyranny, whether it's the tyranny of police or the tyranny of judgment, that courage will buttress us against the fears that we need, that otherwise would perhaps arrest our conduct. And fear can also prevent us from acting with courage. And the midwives come to show us that we need to study this in ourselves. And I would trust that we would be people who would look at this and say, I'll use my courage to overcome fear, as opposed to I'll allow fear to dominate my courage.
Excuse me, I'd like to say something that you could admire them, however they're a group. It's always easier to get something when you're a group. When you're a single person, and one of the midwives decided she's going to disobey Pharaoh, she'd be in big trouble. But
that's a good point. I'm glad you made that.
Was acting together, and it's always better. And I know this from experience.
True. My courage can help you when people, but we also know that people can act terribly in a group. And we saw also, if you're watching what happened in North Carolina, they call it the contagious shooting, that they shot Mr. Young. And if one of them had said no, maybe it would have changed. The same thing. If one can stop many, many can catalyze beyond one. With that, I'm going to mute myself. I'm going to invite Rabbi Rosner to teach us Torah now. Rabbi Rosner.
I'm going to address
Before
the
Reb-
fact that they're a group as compared to if they acted singly.
Yes, thank you, Marilyn. Appreciate
Before
that.
Rabbi Rosner gets started, Jill had something to say.
Hi, yes, so you were talking about the fear, and you gave the Hebrew word. So a lot of times, like the Hebrew word will give you a hint as to what kind, whether it was fear of awe or courage. So I don't know what, I'm not good at Hebrew. So what are the other, like, where does that root word come from? I don't, there's no Hebrew text here.
This word here means more of an awesome fear than a terrified fear.
So wouldn't that
however, when we
indicate?
look at the English, we're stuck with that.
So wouldn't that indicate that it was more out of courage then?
That's exactly where I'm going with it. Exactly. Thank you. However, because we have the opportunity of both words, we now have the chance to be able to juxtapose fear and courage. And thank you, Jill. With that, I know we only have so much time. I want to be certain that we pass the teaching to Rabbi Rosner.
First of all, I want to thank Rabbi Kohn. I was not part of the planning, and it was through his graciousness that that I'm sharing in the teaching. So thank you very much, Rabbi Kohn. Usually when we speak about Shifra and Puah, we're talking about people only known to really expert players of biblical Trivial Pursuit. I want to tell you that I have a Puah cup on my Seder plate, on my Seder table. Now, I got to tell you in advance, it doesn't have Puah's name on it. And this is a riddle, and we'll get there. But the question is, who are Shifra and Puah? One rabbi suggested that they were Egyptian, and therefore examples of tzadikei umot haolam, righteous people of the nations of the world who stood up for Jews. It doesn't do right grammatically, but that never bothered the rabbis before. Another interpretation is that they were, it says lam yaldot ha'ivriot. Now it says that they were Hebrew. So in any case, they were beautiful examples of civil disobedience, of speaking truth to power. But I'm going to share with you a very strange midrash. Now remember, midrash is imaginative. And according to this particular midrash, who was Shifra and Puah? They were Yocheved and Miriam, the mother and the sister of Moshe. So when I say I have a Puah cup, my Puah cup says Miriam on it at my Seder. So the Midrash suggests that somehow they were unable to continue saving the babies. Perhaps they were replaced. Once again, Jewish baby boys were being thrown into the sea. But there's another character in this Midrash. It's Amram. Does everybody know who Amram is? Amram is Moshe's father. So there's Moshe's father, Amram, Moshe's mommy, Yocheved, and Moshe's sister, Miriam. And Amram, according to this Midrash, is the leader of the people. And he makes a decree. Once Pharaoh's decree was promulgated and all these baby boys were being drowned, were being brought to their watery graves, he makes a decree and he says, will we give birth for nothing? Will we watch our futures being entombed in the grave, in a watery grave? From now on, I decree that all husbands divorce their wives. Let no more babies be born to us. Because again, will we give birth for nothing? So Amram divorced Yocheved, AKA Shifra, and all other husbands and wives separated according to this Midrash. So Miriam, AKA Puah, confronts her daddy. he says to him, you are worse than the Pharaoh. Pharaoh decreed only against baby boys, but your decree prevents the birth of baby girls as well. What was it you said, Abba? What were those words? You said, will we give birth for nothing? Abba, am I nothing to you? I'm your daughter. Is my life so cheap, so devoid of meaning? All that love you spent on me, all those kisses and those hugs and the cooing, that for nothing? Were those meaningless? Were they less meaningful than the kisses you gave to my brother Aaron? So Amram heard the pain of his daughter. He reversed the decree. He took Yocheved back into his bed. And in the words of the Bible, he knew her, and baby Moshe was conceived. Think of Sophie's choice. If we have time for questions and answers, I would like to know what you think of the choice that he made. Right? Think of Sophie's choice. Do we say, I'm willing to have all the baby boys die to preserve the people and have the baby girls live? I don't know the answer. But there's another midrash that I want to share with you. Another name, another hero of the Exodus, another woman. Raise your hand if you know who Bitja is. Okay. Who is Bitja? Bitja is the daughter of Pharaoh, daughter of God. And I have this imagination. This is my midrash, sort of. She's on one edge. She's childless in my midrash, in my understanding. And she's watching on the other edge, on the other side of the Nile. And she's hearing the wailing of babies. And all she wants is one child, one baby. All her life, she wanted that. You know? And she says to herself, this is my daddy that's doing this. This is not, he let me play with his crown. I sat on his royal lap and I played with those 2 sticks that the pharaohs always carry on their pictures, right? How can he do this? And he sees this, she sees the baby. She says, Mi'alde ha'ivrim, that she also knows that he's a Hebrew baby. She's also defying her father. And then Miriam, right, AKA Pua, because she says, how am I going to hide the baby? What am I going to do? I can't bring it home to daddy. But Miriam says, I know someone who'll take care of him. And she brings the baby to the real mother, to Yocheved. And so again, this is my imagination. This doesn't happen. But Moshe is brought up in the house of his own mommy. And Moshe, people were weaned at a much later age in those days. We know that from the story of Avram and Yitzchak. And Moshe grows up and he hears daddy making Kiddush, and he hears them singing Shalom Aleichem, and he sees Shabbos being observed. And one day, as an older boy, as a young prince of Egypt, he's walking by and he hears Shema Yisrael, and maybe that's what brings him back, and that's what leads him to remember his heritage. All in my silly imagination. But all these heroes, all these women heroes of the Exodus. So if you want to start a business, there should be pour cups on the Seder plate. There should be Shifra cups on the Seder plate. There should be Bitja cups on the Seder plate. But maybe they were all encompassed in my Miriam cup. Because when I see Miriam, I remember the Midrash, and I remember also Pua and Shifra and all the female heroes. Any questions or comments? Okay.
Rabbi Rosner, I've got a Miriam, 2 cups of Miriam on my table at Pesach. I guess now I'm going to have to call one a Pua cup, but I know what I do with that. We pass and fill water, and we fill each other's water cups. Do you have a tradition that you do with your cup that you could tell us?
We do the same thing. We fill it with water, and at the end we drink it. And especially we specifically refer to the Song of Miriam at the sea, because then after the Song of we all have this idea that Miriam sang at the sea. Miriam sang separately, and I learned in yeshiva because Kol Isha Eva, your voice of a woman. I think it's just the opposite. I think what Miriam is saying when she leads her women in song, and first only the men sing, and Miriam confronts Moshe as well. Miriam says to Moshe, what's going on? What's going on here? We're celebrating freedom. If we're celebrating freedom, I'm damn well going to sing as much as you will. And let the men hear me, hear the voices of women as well, because voices of women have to be heard wherever they are sung or spoken or shared. And that's the story of Miriam singing at the sea, at the Reed Sea. But thank you for asking the question. So it's a opportune time when we read the actual splitting of the sea to drink some of the water from Miriam's cup.
Melissa, you had a question?
I don't understand this Pua Miriam thing. The same person?
It's a midrash, yeah. It's a fantasy. That Pua is another name for Miriam.
Oh yeah. Okay.
It's not true. It didn't happen. But when we read these midrashim, we ask ourselves, what are the rabbis really trying to teach me? And I think the rabbis are trying to teach me about Rabbi Kohn's lesson about courage, about the lesson of speaking truth to power, and also about the lesson of women's voices being heard.
Cool.
We have a question in the chat on where can we find these midrash?
I can get back to you on that. I had it in my notes. I remember it as a kid, but I couldn't tell you right now where this midrash comes from. The one about Bitcha is my own. So it's midrash is also about her bewailing the fact she has no kid, that Pua comes and helps. That you can find in my head. But the one about Shifra and Pua is a well-known midrash. But I'd have to get back to you as far as the actual source.
All right.
And the midrashim that I shared come from Midrash Rabbah, and I can give you the chapter. It's Midrash Rabbah 115, Midrash Rabbah Exodus 115.
So if one was to Google that, one would find that somewhere?
I would suggest if you Google Miriam, if you Google Shifra Pua, Miriam, and Yocheved, you'll find the source.
Okay.
They're only mentioned in that midrash? They're only mentioned there? Are those names?
So Miriam and Yocheved are mentioned in the Bible, and so is Shifra and Pua. But the connection that's made, that Miriam and Yocheved are really Shifra and Pua, that's a rabbinic fantasy. It's not. It's a midrash, but it's not mentioned in the Bible certainly.
Okay.
Anybody else? Valerie, you're not muted. You have something to say?
I was going to ask if I can't recall. Did Miriam have her own children?
There's nothing in the text indicating anything one way or the other.
Sharon?
Sharon, could I ask a question? Sharon?
Yes, Roberta, go ahead.
In the text, it says, I'm not quoting it exactly, but it says, and Shifra and Pua were the midwives to the Hebrew children. In your opinion, were Shifra and Pua Hebrews, or were they Egyptians who were midwives to the Hebrew children?
Well, just so that we can see what the text says, it says here, I'm moving too fast, I'm sorry. Yes, right there. We can see as Rabbi Rosner has mentioned.
They spoke to the Hebrew midwives, so would you therefore assume they were Hebrews as opposed
yes.
to the
Yes, it's a noun with an adjective. So it's like the New York Yankees. Okay.
I only brought it up because I've heard that discussion before. Were they, and I wanted your opinion, were they Hebrews who were midwives to their own people, or were they midwives to the Hebrews, but they were Egyptians? And I've heard
He's the
that
former.
coming out before, brought up before, so.
That they were Israelite. Any last questions before we give our wrapping up and thank yous and such? Jump in, because this is, otherwise you're not going to have us together like this. Well then, thank you, Rabbi Rosner, for joining so that the Newburgh rabbis could be, I don't know, on your screen and my screen, we're side by side, which is kind of nice. And for those who may not know, that our two synagogues share the same campus, Kol Yisrael in Newburgh. And so we're used to having the privilege of teaching together. And I always learn from Rabbi Rosner, who's a fine teacher of Torah. And I'm pleased that all of us from the Clay Kodesh of Orange County have worked together on this so that we can learn from each other. And it's just a nice thing. I know that we've done Hanukkah together, and we're doing more together. And let's hope that we as the clergy can be one big team for all of us together. And so it's nice that we can celebrate women, but the tragedies that we have to celebrate women at all, we should just be, all of us should be Kol Yisrael, all of us, the voices, and all of us, the people of Israel. And we thank you, Sharon, and the Federation for making everything that you do so seamless and so wonderful. And without the Federation support, we'd be so much lacking in Orange County. And I know there's more coming down the pike. So thank you, Sharon.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Rosner. And I wanted to say that the Temple Beth Jacob concert that was canceled last month is rescheduled for this Thursday. That's Alicia Shivgals and the Klezmatics at 7:30. So I don't have the link handy, but if you want to send me an email, I'll try to get it for you. And next Monday, same back channel. I'm sorry?
Each of our synagogues should be able to send the link to all of our members, but we'll make sure you have it too.
And next Monday night at 5:30, Rabbi Marcus Rubenstein on the Shumanite woman. Could be women or woman. Anyway, that should be interesting. And again, we thank everybody for showing up.
Thank you for having
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody. Wonderful rabbis. And
And
Sharon.
this is
Very nice.
So
recorded.
much.
It'll be
Very
on the
interesting.
website, jewishorangeNY.org/Torah, the same place where you go to sign up. I'll probably be posting it tomorrow.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
everybody.
Thank you.
Everybody.
Good night,
Bye-bye.
everyone.
See you. Thank
Thank you.
Brussels sprouts coming down the pike.
you. They're so good. I love them.
Thanks, Sharon.
Yeah, thanks, Sharon.
My pleasure. Thank you, everybody.